The hardest part about the project, and the film really tries to do this well, is to just define what Christian nationalism is, because it's very, very hard to define, both in an academic sense and even to just have a working knowledge of. I think, it's a terrible, terrible name, and I always want to say this because it does sound like, if you just take the words, it sounds like it might be something that's very nice, that's combining the love of country with your love of your faith, and who wouldn't want to be that? Um, but what it really is a political movement. It's a political movement masquerading as faith. And they've gotten a lot of traction on that because having it intertwined with faith, or having the appearance of that, really puts it beyond critique, right? Nobody wants to criticize anybody's faith. We all believe so much in religious liberty in the United States that we want to let people do whatever they need to do religiously. The problem is there really isn't any scriptural or religious underpinning to what the movement has become. Maybe it was originally, but it's gone really, really far afield.
Being a Christian is about the values of inclusion. Christian nationalism is certainly not based on the values of the gospel.
God wants America to be saved.
They're told over and over and over again that you're in danger.
You need to fight if you don't want to lose your country.
We are in a civil war between good and evil.
There's supposed to be separation of church and state, and that's not the case anymore. So how do you explain that to people, especially when you get into a presidential year, election year, and people are going to go vote?
Well, this is the hardest thing of all, because actually, we've tried in the United States to have a really clear distinction, draw a really bright line between church and state. But it's become muddied again over time, believe it or not. I mean, it's one of the central founding ideas of the United States is that in order to have a successful democracy, you have to have everyone on the same level. We can't have two classes of people. And so if this is a Christian nation, as the Christian nationalists like to contend, that even though it's not in the law, essentially it's really a Christian nation, that's an effort to create two classes of people who really have the true birthright to the United States, and people who don't.
There are so many chilling sound bites in this film. One that stands out to me is where you have, if I have to make a choice between democracy and Christianity, democracy's got to go. That was a mind-blowing moment. Can you speak to that first, and then we'll get to Richard Schenck, who I absolutely loved in this movie.
Well, absolutely. The line that you're talking about was, to be clear, it was a point that Phil Vischer was making, not the one that he ascribes to, but his point was to really try to get your head around the ways in which Christian nationalism, which goes on all over the world, there's a particular version of it in the United States that has a particularly difficult conundrum at the center of it, which is that a lot of American Christians have really begun to see the United States in a messianic role itself. That even though it's never mentioned in the Bible, that this is part of God's plan for humanity. The United States plays a critical role in that. And if you believe that the United States plays a critical role in human history that only the United States can play, and that you start to see that the choices that a democratic society are making seem to go against God's plan, then you can justify doing unbelievable anti-democratic things in order to make sure that God's will is done. And so his point was, yes, if you are of this thinking, and democracy, that the United States holds this special place in God's plan, and democracy is getting in the way of that, then you feel like democracy's got to go. And it really is, it's a chilling idea, and it's a really widespread idea.
Can I ask you for yourself, was there a jaw-dropping moment for you when you were in an interview or looking at the film, the jaw-dropping moment for you and said, I can't believe we got this?
The Christian scholar, well, she's a scholar. I don't know if to say Christian scholar. She's also a devout Christian, but Kristen Dumais, she had really not even intended to talk about that. She said that she had never spoken about it publicly, but that her own scholarship she was a student of German history, and that she really saw great analogies to this time, between this time and in the rise of the Third Reich, in the way that Christianity was used to justify otherwise reprehensible behavior. So we weren't expecting that, and that became a jaw-dropping moment. And there were many, many revelations that Pastor Rob Shank shares in the film that I felt were of a similar jaw-dropping nature.
Well, they both just went on a journey of their own and had a kind of discovery of their own that was completely different than the way they were raised or what they thought or the way they worked.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, there's something that Kristen Dumais said that is not in the film, but that I think is a really important concept in understanding all this, which is her very brilliant book. It's called Jesus and John Wayne, and it's another route through this material. But she talks about how she had done the research for that book, which really looks at gender roles and looks at this idea of a kind of toxic masculinity within Christian practice right now, and where that maybe came from, the idea of a muscular Jesus, the idea of a Jesus as a warrior. She mapped it all out and she outlined the whole book, and then she couldn't bring herself to write it and publish it. And the reason was she felt like at the time as a Christian, she felt like this is betraying my team. I don't want to write about this stuff that casts Christianity in a bad light. And then Trump was elected. And she realized that she had to write the book, that it was her responsibility to write the book. It was her calling to write the book because she saw this, she knew it to be true. And the greater calling was not about whether it was going to be embarrassing to people on the fringes of her faith, but was to speak the truth.
You brought up the elephant in the room, of course, which is Trump. The film makes the point that he needed to squeeze every evangelical vote out of the electorate that he could to win in 2016. And here we are again. Iowa is showing that not too many cracks in that wall. But is there any evidence that there could be a crack in that wall?
Yeah, I definitely. Yeah, no, I definitely think there are some cracks in that wall. I don't know how significant they'll prove to be. One of the pastors who is shown quite a bit in the film is Pastor Robert Jeffers. And he is really notable because he was kind of the first pastor of his kind of significant following to endorse Trump, even in light of all kinds of evidence of the ways in which Trump as a person is really very much at odds with Christian teachings, Christian behavior. And he really was a stalwart Trump supporter until very recently. Now, I haven't seen him turn into, a full-on Trump detractor. You asked if there are cracks. There's small cracks. But in Tim Alberta's book, he recounts conversations recent conversations where Jeffers is wondering if all of this has gone too far afield of what the point of Christian teaching is all about.
Two things that resonated with me is that one, the nonsensical aspect of the logic here. For instance, this is evangelical or a Christian nationalist will say, well, this is a Christian nation. It was founded as a Christian nation. Of course it's a Christian nation. But we're always being persecuted. Christians are always persecuted. How do you reconcile that? And then, well, let's start with that. How do we reconcile that notion?
Yeah, I mean that you're right to point out the inherent paradox of that. They feel that their faith is under attack really not because their faith literally is under attack in law or in any other way, but because of the secularizing of the country. The country is on a path that has been, fewer people are church going, fewer people are devout. And so people, Christians who are deeply devout are feeling that they have less status in the culture and less authority in the culture, and that feels challenging. It's not persecution, but they've, taken it on that way because of the tremendous resonance that persecution idea has with biblical stories.
After the insurrection, it was thought that maybe things would change, but they didn't. Can you talk about that?
Of course, there have always been fire and brimstone preachers that are a little off the rails. And I think you have to, that's kind of what we have to reckon with, which is you may believe all of those things, but we really did have for the first time a violent insurrection at the United States Capitol. And it really was perpetrated by these Christian nationalists, by this Christian nationalist movement, and these Christian nationalist concepts are really underpinning the whole thing, which is not to say that everybody at the Capitol was a Christian nationalist, but as Andrew Seidel says in the film, it provided the permission structure to attack the Capitol. And then we're sitting here in a day where Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, #2 in line to the presidency, is very much aligned with this ideology and has explicitly said that what we need more in United States law is the Bible. We need the Bible, and if you want to know my policy agenda, that's it. The Bible is my policy agenda.
Rob Reiner is, of course, involved in this. How much input or how much influence, not influence, but input did he have talking to you? Was Rob Reiner involved in any of the production, or how did you get together with him?
He didn't want to, he's not a documentary filmmaker. He didn't want to make it himself. And he understood that because of his status as a liberal and as actually as a whipping boy for the right, that his participation would be distracting. And so he said, look, I want to help it get going, but then I don't want to have anything to do with it. And really stayed at arm's length until quite late in the process. I mean, we shared a cut with him. I think he is very passionate about this stuff, and he became increasingly impassioned about it. And the more impassioned he got, the more he wanted to be involved. I would say his collaboration on the film, on the content itself, was he was he helped tremendously on a craft level. I mean, we didn't have a lot of conversations about like, oh, who should you talk to? He didn't want to weigh in on that. He wanted me to be the author in that sense. We shared cuts with him, and he would share like, this part is really dragging here. I don't know, this music is not working, like craft related stuff. But in terms of hashing out the ideas that were there, he was available to talk to, but he wasn't interested in taking over the film and directing the content that way.